Hello and welcome to the Brass Junkies. I'm your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my co-host, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you?
I'm all teared up.
Why are you teared up?
Because of allergies. My eyes are watering like crazy.
I thought you were just incredibly moved to
I am
have
moved.
had the privilege of speaking with Jack Burt.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Jack's a cool guy. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's a really, really great friend. He's a great trumpet player, an awesome teacher. Yeah, he's very, as you could hear, he loves learning. He just feels like he's always like in motion. Which
He loves love.
he loves.
I love love. He's been teaching at the, so we didn't get to this till the very end, but it's in the show notes, but he teaches at the University of Maine and has done since, 2004? I think
Yes.
he said, something
Yep.
like that. So,
Yeah.
music ed, musicology, trumpet. And he's like a really good big band conductor.
In his words, yeah,
In his-
yeah. Lance, let's talk briefly about the fact that that your lake house is now a lake house.
We have a
rather than-
lake. I know. This just in. Lake House now has a lake.
Lance bought a lake house, and there has been no lake for how long?
Well, it was over a year, but not, but
Yeah.
only.
That's funny though. That was funny. So there's now a lake. There's water.
This is now our lake. Yeah, we're going for Easters. And, we have a brand new deck. It's like it's going to be actually relaxing and fun. Hey, you know what else?
What?
Check. You ready? Here's something
I'm
you
ready.
didn't know I have. Look at this.
Hey, look at you. What is this? Down there you go, man.
It's the Game of Innovation. So the book that I helped David Cutler write. The Game of Innovation, conquer your challenges, level up your team, play to win. A visual guide. You'd like it, Andrew. Lots of pictures.
I like how you
And,
just opened to a page
Cutler-
that didn't have that many pictures. That
Or
was
just
funny.
two. So Cutler
There you
texted
go.
me because he didn't get. I have like 50 of these downstairs, and he didn't get his yet. And he said, "What's the paper quality like? Is it nice?" And I said, "Yeah, it's really nice." And he goes, and then this was a Cutler joke. He said, "Does it scratch and sniff, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but the problem is you're Jewish and I'm vegetarian, and every page smells like bacon," which he thought was kind of funny.
That's pretty funny. There
So
you
that
go.
was that.
Speaking
So that just in, go buy one.
speaking of bacon, our vegan friend Michael Parker provides the hosting for the Brass Junkies through Parker Mouthpieces.
Boink.
Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist Model Tuba Mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke Model Euphonium Mouthpiece.
Boink.
You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. A shout out to our newest Patreon patrons. We've been having some new people, slowly trickling in. Thank you so much for supporting the Brass Junkies. You get instant access to bonus episodes with a long list of people. How about this? The bonus episode that we just did with Jack Burt. It got pretty heavy, actually.
Yeah, that was very nice of him to share what he shared. It was
Yeah.
a personal story. And
Yeah, and I shared what's I think the best piece of advice I've ever received from anybody, and and it was some good stuff. So you can go to patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to be able to hear the episode with Jack. The bonus episodes always come out 1 week after the main episode comes out. But again, you get instant access to the entire library plus a bunch of other bonus content. Anything else, Lance, before we and he
subscribe to the YouTube channel.
yes. That would be
We would
wonderful.
appreciate that.
We would.
We're 2/3 of the way to 1,000.
Yeah, it hasn't
So,
been around that long.
pretty
so that's it's slowly but surely chipping away.
And things happen at 1,000, so it is a big help actually if you're willing to subscribe. Once we get to 1,000, then it opens up some capabilities there.
That it does.
I don't know if that's the right word.
Without further ado, let us get to the conversation that we had with trumpet player and teacher extraordinaire Jack Burt.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more content by the Brass Junkies, just click on the like and subscribe button. You'll have an opportunity to see some of the greatest brass players in the world, and Andrew and me.
And today on the Brass Junkies, we are joined by a trumpet player who is someone who I am always laughing with whenever I am with him. It's 90% of it is with him, 10% of it is at him, but there's always laughter. A fantastic musician and teacher, and his name is Jack Burt. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
I'm good. I got a shirt just for you. Just for you. I bought this shirt.
So whenever I head into the mouthpiece zone, you're just going to go, no.
All right. A little background for everyone to about how we set this interview up. I texted Jack and said we want to interview you for the Brass Junkies, and he said not cool, man. April Fool's Day was 3 days ago, and I then texted back, oh sorry, I meant to text Phil Smith fat fingers, and he then sent me a text that began with a word where the alliteration of fat fingers would have worked and it was directed specifically at me, which was very funny. And then when we were talking about what we were going to talk about, I said we can talk about anything. We're going to talk about his sabbatical project, which was cool as hell, and about his relationship with Nozil, like all this stuff. And then I said basically anything but mouthpieces. 5 minutes before we got on the call this morning, he sent me a photo of him down at like eye level with a row of mouthpieces grinning over the top of them. So. That's this sums up my relationship with Jack Burt. I want to start here. You did this Etude-A-Day thing over the pandemic, which was I found it incredibly just like comforting. There was just like this normality. I'm serious. Like you sound incredible, and just the fact that you just kept showing up over and over again. And this started like when there was not a lot happening at all, and then you just kept showing up over and over and over again. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, like where you got the idea for it?
Well, I started, like, unlike some people, I was still able to go to work. We weren't locked out of our building. Like, for example, the other person that got me going in this is Jim Wilt from the LA Philharmonic, and he was locked out of Coburn. All his books, like he had to borrow books from people because he couldn't get into his office. I could go, parking lot, you've been there, the parking lot's completely empty, mine's the only car. And for a few months, I did everything in the hall, Minsky, our nice hall. And I was just playing to play because I was, stir crazy like everyone else. And, you got to practice. So I started just playing stuff, and I wish I could find a way to put this together. And then I heard about this trumpet group called how was that? It was a group of trumpet players that got together. I forget the title, like Bud Not Miller Lite or something like that. And it was about recording stuff for each other and just kind of mutual support, excerpts mostly, and etudes. And that got me going. And then I heard about Jim Wilt, and Jim Wilt was doing a COVID Etude-A-Day basically to keep his chops up and because he didn't know when he was going back. He thought he was going to do this for a month or two. He ended up doing, I think, 356 etudes. Wow. And it's like one take, not edited, no stops. And so he was really pushing himself to create something and to, try to recreate the nerves of performing, which it didn't do that, but it was something. And so I don't have an original bone in my body. So I decided to do that. I said, I'm going to do that too. I wrote him and I said, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to do exactly what you're doing. It's what I need. And he's like, hey, I don't own anything. We'll probably meet somewhere down the road. And like 10 days later, we both recorded the same etude on the same day. So like, I've never met Jim Wilt, but he and I feel like, brothers in arms. We went through this together, coaching a lot. Also, other people did it as well. And it's, I ended up doing, I stopped numbering at 350, and I'm still doing it because I don't have a playing job. I don't play for a living. I teach, and you have to be able to play to teach. At least in my way of doing things. So this keeps me, knocks the rust off, keeps interesting. And I'm just doing things on different instruments, trying things that I haven't played before. I probably only knew about 100 of those etudes. So I'd go most of the time. After a while, I ended up going out to camp, where you've been. And because the room is nice to play in, it actually sounds good.
Yeah, it is.
And, I can have lunch, I can take a walk, I can, kayak, whatever I want. And most of them come from there. And I've, gotten a lot of friends out of this that I didn't have before. People didn't know who I was or I had not made contact with. Composers like Phil Snedeker, Chris Smith, the San Diego Symphony principal trumpet player, he's still doing it too. He's recording stuff as part of his routine now. He's got a studio that he bought for his apartment, one of those boxes. And so, we're all kind of like buddies like this, and just mutual support, keep ourselves sane, get your head out of the news. There was multiple reasons for doing this. I've found it very helpful for myself and my playing. I feel I'm 64, going to be 65 next month, and I feel, except for fingers and tongue, I feel better than I ever have. Just so that you know, that's what goes. Fingers and tongue.
Let's just let that just settle for a minute.
I was going to let that marinate.
All right, so I'm going to try and right the ship.
That's what I'm told.
I want to. So, how far in advance do you plan? Like when you were in the middle of that, like you're on number 178, did you know what 179 was going to be? Did you go sequential? Did you go hodgepodge? How'd you do it?
I actually did it very differently. Both Jim and Chris banked stuff.
Oh. They
recorded them and then posted one a day. The minute it was done, boom, I put it out. I had nothing in the bank ever. I could say that in other ways, but I didn't plan. There were some that required plans. Like I did 15, maybe 18 Charliers, and those require practice. You can only 3 or 4 attempts before your chops are gone. Others I like, hey, that's a nice one, and I did it in a day. I mean, it varied, but I never planned other than. Occasionally I was like, well, I'd look around and I'd say, maybe this one in a couple of days. And if it required some practice or renewal, like I hadn't played it in a while, I would work one over time, but I never had a map. Like I said, I'm not that organized, and it kind of just went its way. Occasionally I would, basically no plan.
And so then how did you, undoubtedly there were days you didn't feel like doing it. So how did you overcome that?
I didn't do them. I mean, I didn't post daily. I didn't have a requirement. Sometimes I'd post 4. I had good days where I picked a couple of ones that I knew well, that I could knock out in, 10 minutes with a couple of shots. And others, it took me 4 or 5 days to put one together. Like the Charliers, generally I was quiet for a day or two before I put a Charlier out. There were a couple other big ones, some Brants that are really tough. But, most etudes are not concert events, so they're like 2 minutes long. And you can kind of give yourself 5 or 6 shots. Some of them, the Brants are pretty powerful, nonstop etudes. Charlier is at least 3 minutes, 4 minutes long usually, most of them. The longest one is 6.
Go ahead.
And you don't edit. You just go straight through. One camera, no edit, no enhancement.
And then were there any that you just didn't post because you thought they weren't up to snuff, or you just, like, if you recorded it, you just took the best one and up it goes?
There were a few that I tried that I just couldn't get done. I wish I had. Charlier 23 is one of my favorite etudes. But it's just a haul. And there was no way I was part of it is at some point you have to stop to empty the horn, right? Håkan Hardenberger did a whole set of these. He recorded them on the stage in Malmö, Sweden, and he did about 15 or 16, but they were multi-camera, and he has the magic Yamaha trumpet that never gets spit in it because he can play for 5 minutes and not have to empty his horn. Yeah, I mean, so this was like it became a worldwide thing. A lot of guys were doing this.
Hmm.
I just happened to be kind of, me and Jim and Chris happened to be diligent, and we just kept going.
Well, and don't you think that, as an aside, now the legend of what I did over COVID, I think, is going to continue to grow. And if you can't go to YouTube and look to see, like, I learned to do this and I learned to do this and I lost 400 pounds and gained 400 pounds and
Right.
taught myself French, but like I can't do any of that for you right now. But anybody who had a daily output, I think that's a
Yeah. I mean, they're there.
that's right, exactly. So
And,
and your day to day is dealing with college students.
right.
Yeah. And so mine too. And so many of them are paralyzed by the notion of putting anything out in the world that isn't, in their minds, perfect. And so do you think that this sort of endeavor, or the 100 days of practice, or those sorts of efforts will help combat that? And or, if that's not a good question, because it's maybe not, how do you address that issue with students?
Well, I don't know that I've had any effect on them at all with this. I mean, they're aware of it. They have their own lives. It's hard to break into those kids' heads. The one thing I repeat to them repeatedly is everything.
And you say it over again a lot too, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Plus,
again,
reiterate
yeah.
it from time to
Again
time.
There's
and
the
again.
there's
I
the 10% of laughing at. There you go.
I reiterate it. Anyways, I tell my students whenever they perform that this is just a snapshot. Whether it's they get so bent out of shape about their junior recitals, mus ed majors, right? I'm like, this isn't going to be the high point of your plan. This is going to be, a check mark in your box.
Right.
And you want to do the best you can for everything, whether it's a jury or recital lab. It's just a snapshot. Hey, I had a zit on my forehead this day. How are you going to oppose that? There's nothing you can do about it. And every day, you're just going to try to improve. And if you stick with the horn, you could get my age, and you feel like you've accomplished something. I try to remove the pressure of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know from myself, I probably played at least 50 solo recitals in my career, and I can think of 2 or 3 things that I feel really happy about. But it's not something that I'm going to stop doing because it's not perfect, or because I chipped a note, or because I got nervous and just didn't play as expressively as I wanted. None of that matters. It's something I do. It's a process that I go through, and I try to find things to learn from it. And frankly, I tell them, hey, you're doing this because you like music. This is a thing we do. You have to like it. Don't make yourself miserable by worrying about it. Enjoy the process and the event of being a musician. That's why we do these things. It's not to make something perfect that we can show everybody. Look at me. My high C was in June.
Well, and I love the snapshot. That terminology is perfect. I'm going to adopt it and not credit you. But I think one of the problems that we can fall into, which your Etude-A-Day, Jim, it's like the exact opposite of this, is that when we only share the very, very, very occasional snapshot, then it just builds up all of this pressure, right? Like, if the only time that the entire rest of the School of Music hears us play anything like soloistic is during our junior recital, then suddenly, if that doesn't go well, then we feel like everybody's going to think that we suck at the trumpet or the violin or whatever. But if you're constantly sharing snapshots, it's going to be more of an honest appraisal of where you're at as an instrument operator and as a musician.
Well, that's when my students come here, they play on recital labs each semester in front of their colleagues, right? And the first one is always the worst. They're just terrified. And I remember this one student of mine, she literally was sweating through her blouse. I mean, pit stains. She was so nervous. And I'm like, you're going to be fine. Go out there, go through this. And she did okay. It wasn't great. But at her junior recital, she was like, yeah, I got this. I'm good. It's like a vaccination. It's literally like inoculating yourself against the need to be perfect and the nervousness of playing in front of people. And you just become, I tell people that nerves isn't a lack of preparation, or it's not fear. It's just the recognition that you're in a situation you haven't been in before. And the more you're in that position, the less nervous you get. I mean, we'll talk about these guys eventually, but like Nozil, when they play their first new show, and they haven't done it in front of people, they're nervous. By
Yeah.
the time they played their 50th, they can sit up, think about other stuff while they're playing, and it's just as good, better in some ways because they become
Loose.
inured to the newness of the situation.
They don't even all need to be there by the 50th show. They can just organically
There's
cover
enough
for
of
each other. Be like, oh, Willie's not even here.
Yeah.
Somebody want to sing the bass part?
Yeah,
That-
it's
That's
crazy.
it can be one of those okay, what do I need? You need more experience. That's a really annoying piece of advice. Like if you don't get hired for a job, like say you're I don't know, an electrical engineer, and they don't hire you because you don't have experience. You're like, well, I need a job to get experience, but you won't hire me without experience. But the beautiful thing here is that anyone can create performance opportunities for themselves. This is not, you do not need permission from a company to say, yes, we will pay you every 2 weeks to do electrical engineering work, and then you will have experience. And so if you have a teacher like Jack who is being proactive and setting up things like recital labs and getting you doing that all the time, great. If you're not, if you don't have that luxury, and you've got a situation where you're just waiting until your junior recital, or if you're out of school, create your own performance opportunities, even if those are just pointing one camera at your bell and then sharing it as soon as you get to the last double bar. But that's the beautiful thing, is it's in our control, and you were a great example of that throughout all of this.
Once this thing got started, somehow the main news people heard about it and they did like an 8-minute TV interview with me, and I have to say they did a great job. They produced a really beautiful video.
I thought it was tacky when they were just put half of it was outtakes of Charlie A23, but
It's true. It's realism.
Blooper reel.
They included clips of Jim playing, and because I talked about Jim, but it's I'm sorry, you made me lose my track, dude. I'm an old man.
Maine did a profile
I
on
forget
you.
what I was gonna say now.
I might have set an over/under with Justin Drew and with your wife on how many times I could get you to lose track. So the over/under was set at 3.5. That's one.
I can't remember why I was going to talk about the TV thing. No.
Let me. I'll riff for a second while you think of it. So there's the best book I ever read on performance anxiety was a book called Notes from the Green Room. And one of the aspects of the book was there was a research study out of, this book was from the late 80s or around 1990, somewhere in there. And researchers from the University of Michigan were testing, like they got dudes who had difficulty urinating in public was the test subjects. I swear to God. And what they developed was they called it stress inoculation therapy. And so it was what you just talked about, where you don't put the stress level at 100. You just go, like, if you're nervous about playing your instrument in front of others, then just put somebody else or put a camera on you until that feels comfortable. Then put somebody else in the room. Then put somebody else in the room with a pad of paper, and then have them write, like you don't know what they're writing, and then have them bring somebody you don't know, and you gradually just sort of increase the stress level until you can take on playing a full recital or take on whatever.
That's exactly what you just reminded me of what I was going to say.
Andrew's got a funny joke he wants to get out.
Him and I talked about the red light fever,
Right.
We're playing fine, and we're in our room by ourselves in our homes, and the red light comes on, and our breath changes. Our approach to playing the music changes because of that. We know I start thinking of, oh fuck, what's Peter Bond going to think of this one? Or what's Jim going to think when he hears this? He's not going to like my tempo. All these guys that I know that are trumpet players with opinions, like we all have, while I'm playing in my room by myself, I'm worrying about what they're thinking about what I'm playing. And I mean, that's just crushing. That's just like, okay, that's a good way to not do things well. So you have to learn to stay in it. And Jim and I both talked about how that helps us. I mean, I'm more comfortable playing. I played a mass for Pope John Paul II in San Antonio, Texas in 1986. 250,000 people outside I'm on a podium with a brass quintet and a choir. I was never more chill and having fun in my life. 250,000 people listening to me play piccolo on Handel water music and all fireworks and all this kind of stuff, solos. I was like the cantor, da 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 dee 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 da da, and they respond, all that stuff. Never nervous once, because it was such an incoherent mass that, like in a hall, you can't get nervous. You're just excited about being there. But the idea of one person in your head or that red light is sometimes really terrifying. And that's what we do with this nerve inoculation. You just got to get used to this process, and you can play like you want to. I still think about so and so or this or that. When I play, and I'm like, oh, they're not going to like that, and it's a terrible disease.
Yeah. There's a lesson there for all of us, because somebody who plays the trumpet as well as Jack does, who has as much experience as Jack does playing for anywhere from 250,000 people to showing, most people listening to this have not shared 350 like known etudes on YouTube. One take, one camera, boom, right? Not one take, but one not edited. And yet you can still get that voice. I think that's a powerful lesson, because it never goes away. It will just keep creeping up more and more if you stop doing the inoculation, if you will.
Tim Wilt said to himself when thoughts came into his head, "You're welcome to join me." I look forward to listening to yours.
I was typing out the show notes, and so I think I missed a couple of sentences, because I heard Lance say that there was a study done on men who couldn't urinate in public, and then I heard that the solution was put a camera on them and then put other people in the room. I was like, what is that? What is happening? Like, wait, so you just video, and then it's suddenly like, well, now I feel comfortable. I think I missed a couple of points in there.
I'll send you that YouTube link. Yeah. So, the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University has now received the strangest segue in the history of the Brass Junkies. We would like to thank them for their long-term support, and would like to encourage you to click on the link in the show notes, where you will be directed to the website. You can find out all the great ways you can make music at Duquesne University and the Mary Papert School of Music. Awesome things happening there. Fantastic set of applied faculty on the brass area, not just in the brass area, but specifically for fans of this in the brass area. Very cool, interesting new playing opportunities. And so please click on the link, and very, very special thanks to Jim. Thank heavens it worked, Nova, for making this possible.
Oh, goodness. I don't want to. I want to get to this to your principal's project, because I think it's fascinating. But I just have one more question for you about the Etude-A-Day. How did because I also realized this could be a long answer, but just looking for a short version. How did your setup change during the time? Did it change a lot, or did you in terms of tech, or did you have one setup and it's still the same?
I try to keep it simple. I record with about 10 in. I was recording first with just the Bluetooth mics we were all using, right? And then I just got some tips from people, and I use an MV88, a Shure MV88, plugs right into my phone, has a little app onto the phone. You can adjust the gain, for what room you're in, and that's it. Now, Jim and Chris both they put some money into they had like power amps and into the mixer and stuff. They didn't mess with their sound as much, but like Chris was playing in a dead room, in a box, literally. So he had to figure out a way to make it appealing. And Jim was playing, as far as I could tell, he was playing in his laundry room. Right? So they had to create some reverb, otherwise it would just sound terrible. So they had more extensive tech than I did. I was able to record in Minsky Hall, room 102, which is a nice room, even though it's ugly, and in our camp. And it's a nice trumpet friendly room. So just the simple $150 mic was all I've used, and I'm tech phobic in many ways. So and I'm like, well, that's how I sound. So why do I need anything else? It felt accurate.
By the way, the camp that Jack keeps talking about, I actually know where the spare key is kept, so we might offer that as like a Patreon benefit, Lance. Like like certain threshold will let you know.
You
Just give
do
it.
know.
Get
You
it
know
says
where it is.
private. It says private road. Don't worry about it. It's you. Just nobody will stop you. So, a couple of the turns, it's basically a 1-lane road. You got to go slowly, but I'm sure that your young boys go drive very slowly down that road. I doubt it. All right, so let's talk about this principles project that you did for your 2018 sabbatical, because we were talking briefly before we started, but it ended up being called taking over the music. This was Jack's plan to take over the trumpet world.
We are trumpet players.
Yeah, exactly. Even the cool ones. There's always a little, it's like the self-talk. It never goes away. Can you tell us about this project, because it's fascinating?
Sure. In 2017 or 16, I heard a podcast hosted by the archivist of the New York Philharmonic with Phil Smith, where they went to archived recordings of the orchestra back to like 1915 or something with Heldenleben. And it's like Max Schlossberg and maybe Harry Glanz playing trumpet. And they played them for Phil, and we listened to them in the podcast, and then he stopped and talked about it. And he got so excited talking about just the style of the playing and how things have changed over time, and mentioned the players. They listen to these guys, they listen to Vacchiano, Jerry Schwartz, and then his stuff as well. And they talked about like the progression of trumpet style through the 20th century. It was great. I mean, I was one of the best things, and I think Joe Leslie's done the same thing. And I said, I want to do something like that, but I don't want to do a podcast. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. Um, I'll interview them. And so the way I worked it out is I brought my computer and a speaker, and we listened to recordings over the history of the orchestra. And I just interviewed them, and they talked about it, and then I typed it in. So I did Tom Rolfe's was my first one, Boston Symphony, then Dave Bilger, then Mike Sachs in Cleveland, and then Gabor actually was the one that I did extensively during my sabbatical. I went to Berlin, and we listened to Berlin stuff. So, like, for example, with Boston, we listened to 4 different versions of Sibelius 2. From like the 20s, the 30s, the 50s, and the 80s, or the
So cool.
20s, the 50s. So we heard like George Mager, Gatala, Schluter, and Tom Rolfes, right? And that's a lot of styles right there.
Yeah, it is.
So there's a lot of differences. And then orchestras have changed, conductors. It's all fascinating stuff. With, for example, with Philly, we listened to Shostakovich 5. They basically played it a year after it was premiered in 38 or something. And so that's probably, can't remember who was there at that time. And then there's the Gil Johnson Ormandy recordings, and then Dave's recordings. With Cleveland, over 30 years, they've only had 3 principals. So over 80 years, I'm sorry, they've only had 3 principals. Louis Davidson, Bernie, and Mike Sachs. There was 1 year of a guy named Smith who moved down into the section. You hear him on some early Strauss stuff. But the unity of the Cleveland Orchestra sound over time versus the very different Boston Symphony recordings, the very different styles of the Philadelphia Orchestra, because Dave sounds very different than Frank Hadarabic. Dave was more along the lines of someone like Gil Johnson, a real elegant player that, everybody loved Gil Johnson's playing, period. It's just gorgeous, right? And then in Berlin, I didn't play as many things for Gabor as we did just talk about the history of the orchestra and the way trumpets work, and the idea of how they performed, for example, during the Karajan era, where they did doublings over, like if you listen to the opening of Mahler 5 with von Karajan, after the initial da-ga-da-dee, ba-ba. From that point on, it's played by more than one trumpet. Ba, beep, 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 ba, ba. And
I
it
didn't know
sounds
that.
like the gates of hell. I mean, it's really amazing. It's terrifying because it's like an army coming at you rather than a solo player. So we talked about horns, and we talked about uh, the way the trumpet section works in that orchestra. So this was all around 2018, my fall, when I finished, and I ended it interviewing Gabor in Berlin. I was able to, and I watched a rehearsal and 3 performances of Mahler 5 with the new Berlin field trumpet player Guillaume Gell. Sat in various places in the hall, and it was great. And it's still there. It's still out on ITG. You know, it's a limited readership because of they kind of keep a tight hold on their articles. They want you to join, but it was something I wanted to do. Listening to music with great trumpet players and talking about it. What else? What could be cooler than that?
Absolutely nothing, Jack Burt. Absolutely nothing. I can't come up with anything. What I love about just even the concept of this is, even if you have no interest in orchestral music or in principal trumpets or anything, it's fascinating to me that you did such a deep dive with like people that are this important and influential in the area. I once had, when I was teaching a brass rep class, I had someone come in and do a presentation on natural trumpets, which like you're not going to be surprised by this, Jack Burt, but like I have no interest in that at all. Like I'm not like I'm not opposed to them, but I will never search for them on YouTube or on Google. Like I just don't care. And yet the amount of knowledge and the passion that they brought to it, I was literally riveted for like 45 minutes by this conversation, because it was an expert who was talking, and I could tell that it was very important to him, and he delivered it in a great way. It's so cool that you got this much time, that you got to dig really deep with these people rather than just superficial. I love what we do, where we get to like talk to people for, an hour. And I think that that's really important, and to keep moving and to get through so many people. But the fact that you like flew to Berlin and like, dug deep, that's really cool. Were there any surprising moments that you can think of, like in terms of things that people pointed out or cared for or didn't care for?
Well, it's part of it for me was how the trumpet, our concept of trumpet playing has changed so much in the 20th century. You listen to pre-World War II trumpet players. The horns are narrower, the tonguing is more forward. It's really very in your face kind of forward playing. And we've played, it's no secret we play bigger equipment. Even as we go to smaller horns, like trumpets now, we play C trumpets in orchestra. Back in the 30s, they were mostly playing B flats, but the C's are pretty big and the mouthpieces are big. Whereas back in the 30s and 40s, they were playing narrower B flats than our own B flats, and playing much smaller mouthpieces. And it's just a different, you listen to the Cleveland or Philadelphia play something from the 30s, like we listened to Scheherazade. There's a 1930s recording of Cleveland playing Scheherazade with Louis Davidson. And the amount of articulation in that is just astonishing, how good that orchestra was and how forward it was. But you couldn't get away playing that like that now. I mean, it's different now. And we play with much more body to our tone. We don't tongue as forward. And it's just this progression of what's acceptable in the trumpet world now. And there's, we all talk about homogenization of orchestral sounds in the world, and we all kind of bemoan it to a certain extent, but at the same time, none of us are willing to really be that different.
Right.
because our job is to match, our job is to get a job, our job is to play like other people. So it's just an evolution of sound. Um, Even in places like Berlin, where the amount of equipment change is less than in America, there was still a broadening and a like taking off the edge of the sound from German trumpets in the 50s, for example. They can sound really, really forceful, whereas now there's a more kind of like acceptable broadness to the volume, to the whether the volume is in your face or broadened a little bit. Yeah.
Like 25 years ago, I took what was it called? Brass. It was basically brass listening class with Vince Chikowitz at Northwestern, and by the end of that, that semester, we could identify like Russian sounds versus other Eastern European versus Western European versus and Chicago and Cleveland and all that, and like if he were still around, first of all, that would be impressive. He'd be very old, but if he were still around, like, and he was doing now, it's like it'd be more of a seminar because
Yeah,
so many orchestras sound the same.
when I was in college, we used to play, in the music dorm room, we would play like Drop the Needle.
Yes,
And
me too.
So name the piece, name the orchestra, name the conductor, right? And the Czech Philharmonic, Berlin, Dresden, London, New York. I mean, even in America, the trumpets in the 70s, they were different. You had Gitala, you had Jerry Schwartz or Vacchiano, you had Bernie, you had Bud. and those are just those, right? I mean, then you're not even mentioning Sue Slaughter in St. Louis or L.A. or San Francisco, and now it's much broader. But yeah, I could tell based on the trumpet player, based on the oboe. The oboe was always a giveaway.
Sure.
And based on the first horns.
Yeah.
Because they all sounded different.
Yep.
And now,
Plus, you knew what records your buddy owned, so.
Yeah. I knew that. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's your Mahler 4 from Chicago.
I recognize that skip.
My predilection for rotary trumpets is well known, and one of the reasons is that just my initial exposure to music was happenstance, the Berlin Philharmonic, and so that Mahler 5 I was talking about, that became my kind of like original source orchestra sound, and I'm probably the only American who first heard the Mahler 5 with Chicago and Schulte and thought that the trumpet sounded kind of puny because he was playing a C trumpet and he was by himself. And Bud is frankly a French style trumpet player. I mean, he studied with Georges Mager, and that narrow C trumpet sound was so different than the broad rotary B flat. I didn't know that I was listening to a rotary B flat until I went off to college and studied with James Darling and saw a horn in the on his stand. Like, what's that? And he goes, oh, that's what we play this, and this for. So I was kind of like, that was the sound I had in my head that I just kind of like, I like that better. And, those differences still exist. They're even now, they're less so.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a question for Lance. Lance, did military bands, to me, like the elite military bands in DC, there's a similar homogenization that exists now? Not that there's no differences, but in general, did back in the day, like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, was it the same as orchestras where there was like very distinctive sounds between the Navy band and the Air Force band? Maybe you don't know.
I don't think it was as great of a difference. I mean, I think it came down to who the soloists were largely.
Sure.
I mean, but if you want to just sort of look at euphonium, which is the thing I would arguably know the most about, the sound that Earl Lauder played with was very different than the sound that Brian played with. And just to take those two examples,
Sure.
Now pretty much everybody plays like Brian, and if you don't play like Brian, then you're not going to fit into one of those bands. And he created, I don't mean that to sound like a negative thing or a criticism, but that's just the reality of it. He had this machine down at North Texas, which he just was cranking all these players out. And now, I mean, you look at who's playing in those bands, and you better sound like one of Brian's students or like Brian to the best of your ability, or you're not going to fit in real well.
Right.
That's basically what happened in the oboe world in America to a certain extent. In the 60s and 70s, there was 4 or 5 very, very unique oboe sounds. The two Gomberg brothers in Boston, the Philly oboe, John Mack, Ray Still, they all had their characteristics. And now so many of them are ex-John Mack students or grandchildren of John Mack that there's this kind of like American sound, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Philly had hired a non-French school oboist recently, and that was like created some because it wasn't a tableau style. I don't know this person. I can't speak to how they play. I'm sure they're great, but I mean, this, you know, these teachers have a broader influence than they used to in the old days. We had it happen first in the trumpet world, where just about everybody in the 60s and 70s that had a job studied with George Mager in Boston. Bernie and Bud both were Mager students playing C trumpet. That's why we play C trumpets now, because we didn't play C trumpets before him. We all played B flats. New York and Philly fought that for a long time. They stayed on B flats longer because they were part of the Russian, German, Jewish school. Schlossberg, Rosenberg, all these different trumpet players that stayed for a while, as well as in Cincinnati. But this George Mager post World War I French school thing really took over the States. You're thinking something, I can feel it coming.
I so rarely think things.
He needs a potty break. That's that face.
No, I was, before Lance reads the next spot, I was just remembering that I also took a class with Ray Still at Northwestern, a chamber music class, and there was a piece where I wasn't playing in, and I was at the back of the hall, and they were doing some Mozart, and I leaned up against the wall, and I accidentally leaned up against the light panel, and so I made the entire recital hall in the middle of like this octet just completely go black, and then I turn around and I turn the lights back on, and then as they come back up, like Ray Still, who is quite old at this point, is just kind of like just staring at the back, and he's just staring at me like with this look, like this oboe legend with this look like you had one job, kid, which were the two jobs, like don't make any noise and don't turn off the goddamn lights. And then I just kind of like smiled and gave a thumbs up, and he actually smiled at me. It could have gone either way. And then he's like, let's start at letter E. And it was, yeah, anyway, there's my Ray Still story.
Yeah.
Lance, Houchin Horns.
Houchin Horns aims to spread the joy of music through providing the highest level of product, services, and resources to the brass playing community. 15-day money-back guarantee with free shipping on all new instruments and accessories, with multiple easy financing options on all inventory. Terms and conditions apply. Mouthpieces by Greg Black, Lasky, Pickett, Schilke, and more. Houchin Horns stocks the finest makes of brass instruments, including Blackhead, Silbury, Swedish Shires, Engelbert, Schmidt, Paxman, Tide, and Yamaha, among many others. Repairs and customizations are done in-house. You can browse of interest in consignment instruments at houchinhorns.com. You can browse the extensive news and resources page at houchinhorns.com for great pedagogical info, articles, interviews, videos, and events. Enter the promo code Junkies at online checkout to receive 10% off your purchase from houchinhorns.com. Some limitations apply. Traffic and sports on the 8s.
That's Will Ferrell doing a Carrie. Like that's all.
You mean Stephen King, Carrie, or?
All right. So you are very close with Nozil, which you say it cooler than I do, but if I try to say it the right way, I sound like an ass. You're very close with the Nozil Brass, and can you talk a little bit about how you got to know them and about, you know, what your take is on their impact on the brass chamber world?
Sure. I've had like 2 events in my life musically that I had to go out and kind of like wander the world, wander outside and think about. You know, when I was a student and once I graduated college, I went to Berlin, West Berlin at the time in 1980, and I saw Bruckner 5 with Karajan in Berlin,
Wow.
and literally didn't know. Am I still there? Sorry, my connection is stable. Yeah, sorry. I didn't know how to handle it, and I went for a walk in the December Tiergarten in Berlin to try to. Still a great memory. And the other one was the first time I heard Nozil. You know, I only made it. It was 2006 at an ITG in Glassboro, New Jersey. And I only made it to the end of the first half because I was having dinner with a friend of mine and came late. But my initial reaction the first time I heard them was, I didn't know you were allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. Everything about it was so unique and different, and so they'd play everything, and then they'd play jazz, and then they'd sing, and then they'd do comedy, and then they'd play, The Rite of Spring, and a mix of a million different things all at once, and they were incredible, and I was just stunned. I went outside, I walked around, I called Maurice, and I said, honey, I heard something today, I don't know how to handle it. I think I got to go to Austria and meet some people. I mean, literally, I said that. And because I had at the same time, I was developing a connection with Carl Schagel, with Schagel horns, because he sold us a couple of horns for my studio. I ended up going 2008 and meeting Thomas Dansch first, who the only reason Thomas likes me at all is because I live in Maine and I live near Stephen King, and Stephen King's his favorite author. So I was able to get a signed, dedicated book to Thomas at one point. And so it's just started there, and I've just gone. And for me, they'll say, oh, poo-poo, we're just, trying to entertain people. But, for me, it's like, I was at a Nozil gig, and I was like, this is like Mozart. This is like Marriage of Figaro. Mozart didn't think he was doing something eternal. Mozart didn't think he was writing something that people were going to listen to and come to tears on in some cases 200 years later. He was writing an evening's entertainment, and he wanted people to be happy. And that's kind of what Nozil is doing, but their comedy is so warm and personal that you can be a 4-year-old or a 90-year-old, and you are a musician or a complete non-musician, and be equally moved and entertained. The fact that they are all world-class musicians is irrelevant to what you get out of it. The brass playing is almost secondary in my mind when I go see them. As much as I think Thomas is not only the hardest working trumpet player in the world, he's one of the greatest because he can do anything you want. Mm-hmm. But I just found what they did to be so moving personally. Some people just take it as a joke, okay? But I see it like a deeper humanity in it, like in The Marriage of Figaro when the Countess, finally gets the Count in the place she wants him to be, and he has to get down on his knees and beg for forgiveness.
Spoiler alert.
It's just an entertainment, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, this is really moving. Yeah. And that's what they do. There's a wonderful moment where in a Nozil thing where they're all making fun of Bertel during he's trying to do some exercises in an Olympic things, and finally he does something well, and Leonhard, who's always the evil person, comes and reaches into his pants and pulls out, and you see that he's actually under his clothes he's wearing a tutu, like he's a cross-dresser or something, and he's all embarrassed for a second, and the music takes him to where he starts to just kind of okay, that's what I am. And he starts pulling out his tutu and he dances a funny little ballet, and it's like he's accepting who he is. And the music is just letting him do it. And it's really heartwarming. And it's just comedy, but it's also like, I mean, there's this in their shows that I find super. That's the reason I love them, not just the playing.
I feel like they totally changed the game. I had the same experience that you did, Jack, and I just thought, oh, okay, I need to recategorize. This totally reshuffled the deck. It's like when it's like when a Michael Jordan comes along and you go, oh, this is what's possible. Because we had this impression that this was, and Boston Brass did our thing, and Canadians did their thing, and Empire, did their, and then all of a sudden this other thing came along, and I just thought,
this happened twice in my career, really. When I was in college, you really weren't allowed to be a jazz trumpet player and a classical trumpet.
Yeah.
and then went and showed
You
up.
had to be legit
And
or
both.
commercial. Yeah, exactly.
Boom! You had to choose. You weren't allowed. I mean, and Hans Gansch, Thomas's older brother, had the same. He's maybe 7 years older than me. He had the same experience. It's like I had to choose, and for me, classical was a safer life. So he did it, right? But I grew up in South Florida in the jazz scene. I actually lived next door to Jaco Pastorius, for a while. I heard him practice growing up. Yeah, yes.
How the hell? You've only told. It's not like you've told me like hundreds of interesting things about yours. It's like you've told me 3, and you've been sitting on the fact that you lived next to Jaco Pastorius and used to hear him practice.
And I didn't know who he was. My sister did, but I didn't.
Holy shit!
But I lived in a jazz community, right?
Wow.
Apparently.
But I had to choose, and now you can't get away with both. A guy, if I retire, the person taking my job can't be me because I can't do jazz. I mean, I ran a jazz band, but I'm not a soloist. I can't improvise. That person's not going to get a job here if they're like me. You got to be able to do this now. And Nozil has changed that to the extent of playing comedy, playing commercial, mixing it all up seamlessly is part of the show now. I mean, this is okay. We've added to what you need to be able to do.
That's right. Yeah.
I didn't hear anything after you just said that you lived next to Jaco Pastorius and used to hear him.
He lived above
practice.
a laundromat, and I lived next to the laundromat.
Wow.
Federal Highway in Hollywood, Florida.
No kidding. That's wild.
Probably 73, 72.
Wow. I'm trying to process this. That's like,
All right,
yeah.
we're doing this completely out of order, but Jack, can you tell everybody what it is? What's your day gig? Like, what's the course of your year look like for anybody who might not be a Jack Burt fan?
I'm the trumpet professor at the University of Maine. I teach mostly mus ed kids, but also performance majors. For 15 or 16 years, I've been here since 2004. For 13 years before that, I was trumpet professor at Texas A&M Kingsville, which is a badass music school. I mean, huge department. I had 37 trumpet majors.
Whoa.
It's North Texas of South Texas. It's a great school. But I wanted to live in Maine. I wanted to live in Maine because my wife was from here, and I love the state. And the job opened up. Just got lucky. So I've been here since 2004. And for 15 of those years, I ran a jazz band as well. I fraudulently directed the first jazz band here. I could rehearse and pick good music and let other people.
Hey, I used to live next to Jaco. I got this.
Yeah. And,
you were more influenced by the spin cycle on the washing machines.
Right. Yeah.
Can you? Did he just? I mean, jazz band. It's still conducting, but we just had a conductor. Imagine if someone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm conducting a fraudulent version of Bruckner 6 this weekend." That's funny. That's funny.
Well, I mean, there's certain things about running a jazz band that are important. Rehearsing on time, putting the music together and tempos, and picking good music. I could do that. I mean, I've always played in jazz bands. I've just never been an improviser. But
you've got great ears too. It's like a big thing about standing in front of a jazz band is attention to detail.
I've completely lost you. There.
Okay.
A
big part of being in front of a jazz band was that me or was that him?
I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Now I get it. I stepped in that, didn't I? See,
and this? You said that the key to leading the big band was having good ears, and you're like, I can't hear you. Are you? It's not. I'm not. And he didn't get that you.
No.
And I can't. It's not.
I am making a vow that for the rest of this interview, I'm not going to say anything nice about Jack because that just blew up in my face. So, there. Oh, right good there. Lord. That was pretty good.
To finish my sentence, I now teach music history. I do a upper level music history course once a semester. Next year, I'm doing a Mahler seminar.
Cool.
And I teach the last of the sophomore music history class.
Did you have a musicology background? Or this
Yeah,
is just,
my bachelor's degree was in musicology, and I was accepted to study musicology in Berlin. That's why I went there. One of the reasons I went there. The other one was chasing a girl, a dark-haired cellist. Strangely enough,
That's not your wife?
that's not my wife.
I
Yeah,
think Jack might have a type.
yeah. But anyways,
See, now
so
you
I
got
went
me on
there-
the defensive. I'm like, wait, is he talking about Marisa? I don't think he is, but now I'm on the back foot. There you go.
Anyways, when I went over there, I started taking lessons, and that's kind of when I took lessons with a German trumpet player, and that's when I kind of made the choice. I didn't want to study musicology my whole life. I'd rather play, so I went back and started on my graduate stuff at South Carolina and then at Texas, and in between 3 years in the Mexican orchestra.
Well, which is the North Texas. I almost said the South Texas of North Texas. That's funny.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have you stick around for the bonus episode for our Patreon patrons. Before that, the Practicing Corner presented by Hitz Academy Practice Coaching. Jack, do you want to get more done in less time in the practice room? Like compound interest in a bank account, making yourself even just 10% more efficient in the practice room will make you a better practicer forever, and those results will continue to compound for literally the rest of your career. Let Practice Coaching from Hitz Academy help you implement systems that will improve every aspect of your practicing routine, do better at auditions, and unlock your true potential as a musician. Learn more at practicecoach.link/coaching. So, Jack, because you're a good friend, I gave you a full 2 minutes of warning before we started, rather than 1 minute, which is what I give my enemies. Do you have a practicing tip for us?
Sure. Probably the most important practicing routine I put into my life was the stamp routine that I developed, the James stamp. It's exercise 6B from the stamp book, and I kind of created my own version of it. Basically just chromaticizing things rather than just the sketched out version that's in the book. And I started doing that in my early 30s, working on it with my students. I wanted to be able to sound in the middle register like Arturo Sandoval. I wanted to have a big, fat, Harry James-ish kind of, and the pedal register helps you do that. I don't care about the pedal register except in how it helps my middle and upper register. And I found that everything about trumpet playing became easier because the stamp routine helped me relax my air and use it more effectively. I could talk about it for a half hour, but I do have 3 videos on my channel where I go through my entire stamp routine. It's like 3 9-minute videos, and I talk during it. So there's anybody interested can email me for my own printout of it, because it's, like I say, it's done fully chromaticized, where there's stamp doesn't give you everything. And it's part of everyday routine for me, more or less, and something that I found very, very useful, and kind of like meditation on the trumpet. So I just love doing it.
Yeah, I can't think of a single musician on any instrument that I really look up to that doesn't have an incredible sound in the middle register. It's just kind of like it's where it all comes from, right? That's where it all comes from.
the cash register.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, I'm still processing the fact that Jack just mentioned now, after all these years, that you live next to Jocko. We are going to have Jack. Well, I'm going to yell at him some more about not telling me that, but we're going to have.
You didn't
him
hear that?
around.
They had this great album, Jacko and Jocko was like.
Jacko and Jocko.
It was really good.
We broke up, man.
It was way out. Yeah.
We broke up after that because it just wasn't about the music anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, he started cheating on Jacko with some group named Weather Report or something like that. Yeah, which like that. Yeah, the writing was on the
Some
wall.
Joe guy, some Salino or someone,
Choco. That might be the stupidest thing you've ever said, which is
Aw.
an impossibly high bar, but it's in the running.
Aw.
We're gonna have Jacko stick around for the bonus episode, which is available to all of our Patreon patrons. If you would like to learn more about helping to support the show, I was surprised when we asked Jack if we could interview him. He demanded a fee of $3,000, so we got to recoup these costs somehow. So please become a Patreon patron for us. You get instant access to a whole bunch of bonus episodes, as well as a bunch of other content. Patreon.com/The Brass Junkies. And I think that is it. Lance, am I forgetting anything?
Undoubtedly.
I think so too, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna stop. That is gonna do it. Jack, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Glad you could join us. And Lance, as always, you were prepared. You were inspired. You were measured. Emotionally and professionally. And I just Jack, on behalf of both Jack and I, thank you.
That's what I do.
And that's going to do it for another episode of The Brass Junkies.
You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/The Brass Junkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/Pray for Jens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.